All right. Welcome everyone to the July Accounts Receivable Core Committee. Hope everyone's having a good afternoon on this very warm day. Want to thank everyone for taking the time. I know for many of you in the accounting world, this is a very busy time of year, so I appreciate you taking the time. So we'll get through the agenda as quick as we can. Let me see here. Who do we have in the lobby? Get everyone? Okay. So if I hadn't said so already, my name is Gerald Floyd, Statewide Accounts Receivable Management Coordinator here at DAS. First off, we have a couple of announcements. Where is our lobby? Did we get everyone? I think everyone's in. Okay. First up, some announcements. Just a reminder that the year-end training this year will be virtual through Workday. Once the link is available, I will send an email through the AR listserv. In May, I think I had misspoke, or I should say, at least I was probably misunderstood. And agencies that are not part of the Workday Enterprise Learning, I thought that they were going to have a guest login for Workday. Apparently, that is not the case. There will be a separate link to access the training, so it will be slightly different, but the process will be still the same. You will have a link to access the training through a virtual process. It just may not be actually logging in through Workday. So I apologize for misspeaking at the last meeting. This is still a new process that we're transitioning to, so we're all still kind of learning this a little bit. So bear with me as we transition into this new process here. So anyways, any questions on the training this year? It is basically the same kind of training we've had in the past. The format is a little different as we are meeting to the new communications templates. They have some structure that they want us to meet to, so it'll laid out a little different, but the content is essentially the same as what we've had in the past. So from that perspective, wanted to be able to let you know that part is not any different than what we've done in the past. So don't be alarmed by the fact that it's in a different format. The content is basically the same. Next up for announcements, the DOR OAA is looking for some volunteer agencies to meet with their revenue agents to talk about the types of accounts that your agency is sending for collections, answer some questions from their agents regarding the actions that your agency takes before you send the accounts over for assignment. Kind of just helps them better understand your accounts, so that when they're collecting on them, they can essentially do a better job. And so If you are willing to participate, please contact Todd Evans via email or phone. And so I will put his email and phone number in the minutes. I could read it off, but you probably would not get it written down as fast as I talk. So I will put it in the minutes, but I'm sure most of you already have his contact info if you already work with DOR. So, but basically just reach out to Todd and he will coordinate a time for you to meet with their revenue agents and kind of begin that process of talking with them and answering some of those questions if that's something that you would like to do. So that's all I have for the swarm announcements. So we'll move on in our agenda to Department of Revenue OAA fee study. This is something that DOR was tasked with, I believe, in the last legislative session to kind of look at their income and expenditures and their rates that they charge. This is not by any means a completed study. We just wanted to share with you that this is something that they're in the process of, and primarily sharing it for those agencies that do not pass the fee to the debtor, because while there is not expected to be any change in rates for FY27, there could be, because again, the study is not completed, there could be a possibility of a rate change by FY28. And so I know there's a lot of unanswered questions about that at this point. How do we know what that may be? But because we are coming up on budget development period for agencies, this could have a possible impact on what you may need to request for your budget when it comes to the fees that you would be, or an allocation, if you will, for the costs that you would incur for the cost on accounts that you would send to the Department of Revenue and the fees that would be charged. So if those rates go up, you may need to request a little bit larger budget. Again, we don't know what that rate increase may be at this time. And so it's a handful of agencies. When we looked at FY25 data, there's about 23 agencies that reported fees that were paid by the agency, although about 8 agencies comprise 97% of that amount. So, for a large majority of those agencies, it was a very insignificant value. So, that change in a percentage of that fee that OAA charges probably wouldn't be a huge budgetary issue. However, there's a couple of agencies that may need to be considering what that impact may be. And we've kind of begun some of the conversations with the DAS budget folks, because we're talking about a mid-biennium change. Is that something that may be easiest done through like an e-board type thing? Because we don't know what to ask for at this time. But again, just wanted to share with folks that this was a directive from the legislature that DOR can. We don't know the results at this time, but there could be at some point in the future a change in their rates. And so as if you are an agency that does not pass the fee to the debtor, it may be something that you want to at least factor into your budget consideration, uh, at least in a small degree, knowing that there could be at least half the biennium where they might have some possible change in that rate. So again, I know there's a lot of what ifs in that situation there, but just wanted to give everyone a little bit of a heads up on that to, you know, not have it be a total surprise if and when that time comes that there is a new rate developed. And so, um, is there any questions? I don't know that I would have the answer per se, but does anybody have any questions around the OAA fee study? Julie, should we assume that if you're talking about the DAS budget staff, you'll be reaching out to us with that data as well? Um, so I shared with the DAS budget manager that OAA was doing this fee study and that there could be a rate change so that if agencies needed to request a larger budget for their collection fee line item, so to speak, that they understood why the agency was doing that. That was the result of this OAA rate increase. So certainly as the OAA fee study is concluding and they are determining what that rate change will be, we'll, OAA and myself will continue to be in communication, especially with those agencies that report that the agency pays the fees and not the debtor. We'll continue to reach out to those agencies to let them know, what those new rates will be, as well as, other agencies, because it will impact things downstream, such as um, going forward when you are writing your collection letters and you're doing the notification where you're passing the fee and you have that formula that you're providing that notice that says you can incur this additional cost. That formula will need to be, um, you know, reworked based on whatever that new rate will be at that given point in time. So that will all be part of a communication plan there. But we wanted to make sure that the DAS budget folks were aware that from the budget side, if an agency needed to increase their line item for that fee, that they understood why the agency was needing to do that. So we just want to make sure everybody was kind of in the loop, so to speak. Any other questions? Hearing none, seeing none. Next agenda item. We want to do, this is probably, I guess, a little bit late, 21 days late, but reminder that the minimum wage increased on July 1. So any agencies that have garnishment authority, the the wage garnishment exemptions have changed because of the minimum wage increase. And so as a result of that, if you use the model forms on the DOR website, or not the DOR, the DOJ website, excuse me. So this is the DOJ page for model notice of garnishment forms. They have, all these different, uh, specific forms that are for county, state, debts other than state tax. So for essentially all the other non-DOR type taxes, non-DOR agencies. This is the wage exemption calculation form that you would use, which is this form right here. And so you can see that basically what this is a result of Senate Bill 1595 from, let's see, what year was this? This was in the 2024 session. And so it basically had changed the, the wage exemptions for each year. And so as a result, here is the new minimum exemptions for 2026 through July 1st of 2027, whether it's for wages weekly, every 2 weeks, half month, or monthly. So again, this is the form for the non-tax debts other than state tax. So if you're an agency that does that, just make sure you're using that form there, and making sure that you get that new value there. And just another component of that is that because this no longer has a set amount under Senate Bill 1595, it becomes the result of a calculation under the in July of 2027. It's a calculation under the statute based on whatever the new minimum wage is calculated by BOLI, and it's multiplied by a certain number of hours, and then calculated out to the weekly rate, out to the monthly, so on and so forth. And it instructs the state court administrator to basically do these same calculations, if you will, based on the new minimum wage that would be calculated by BOLI, for example, beginning on July 1, 2027, whatever the new minimum wage rate is, and then using that formula that's in the statute, they would then post what is these rates for the minimum wage exemption on their website for the state court administrator on the judicial department website. So, when we get into, June of next year, because BOLI, I believe by statute, does the minimum wage calculation by April. So somewhere between April and the end of June, the state court administrator would do these garnishment exemption calculations to then post on their site to be effective by July 1. So we'll kind of coordinate getting that link available for folks to know what those new rates will be in July of 2027. So just wanted to kind of give everyone the reminder and kind of an advance heads up for 2027 on those wage exemption calculations. Any questions on that? Not hearing any. Okay. for the last few meetings, we've kind of gone over a couple different OEM policies just to kind of, you know, remind folks of a couple different things that, you know, maybe haven't been talked about in a while. So this meeting, we wanted to talk about OM 357010, which is regarding interagency receivables. And so, you know, when we looked at fiscal year 25 LFO data, there was about, this is a smaller percentage, I will say. There's only about 15 agencies, but there were about $8.7 million worth of exemptions in the LFO reported for state agency receivables. And so not that that's, you know, you would never have any state agency receivables reported, but the fact that they're liquidated and delinquent at that volume kind of becomes a little bit concerning at times when you have this policy. So wanted to be able to kind of talk about this a little bit and make sure that folks are aware of this policy and the things that should be done, and kind of on both sides for both billing and paying side of this process. And so, you know, hopefully in the attempt to begin to reduce those liquidated and delinquent state agency receivables. So first off, paragraph 102, you know, I just want to touch on some major points of what this policy kind of is about. And so first off, in paragraph 102, it discusses that it's a shared responsibility and cooperation between the agencies to assure that one, the providing agency bills for goods or services properly and promptly, and that the receiving agency pays for those goods or services in a timely manner. So, you know, that's kind of where the partnership aspect comes in. And then paragraph 104, it allows a little bit of flexibility as far as how an agency would accumulate, you know, or bill based on, you know, as far as a cutoff point. You can bill on a monthly cycle, a quarterly cycle, et cetera, depending on what it is that you are providing in terms of a good or a service. It allows that flexibility, but it does state that based on whatever cycle that is, there is a time frame for distributing the invoices within a specific time period. For example, on a monthly basis or billing cycle, that you would have those invoices completed and distributed within 15 days, and then 30 days for quarterly or annual billing cycles. So again, kind of coming back to that promptly language, you know, it wants to make sure that there is a specific time frame, that you're not identifying or accumulating these charges and then taking a long time to get the invoice out and get them over to the agency that needs to pay for those. So that's kind of another aspect of this. Paragraph 106, And this is kind of where things really start to pick up when we're talking about interagency receivables. Receiving agencies must make payment within 30 days of the invoice date unless there is a dispute. The undisputed portion must be paid within the 30 days. So, for example, if the bill is $1,000 for 5 different items and 2 of the items are in dispute and the other 3 aren't, you pay for the 3 items that are not in dispute within those 30 days while you are resolving whatever the disputed items are. You don't just leave the whole thing in limbo. And so you need to make sure that you're getting those payments completed for those undisputed portions timely. It uses the word promptly. That word is used quite often in this policy, and it's done, I think, intentionally. And so the next portion of this is under 106, when you're talking about those disputes, is it requires that you provide a written notification that explains what is the disputed amount and the reason for the dispute, so that those can get resolved. And you want to do that essentially at the same time or within that same 30 days, so that the agency that did the billing can resolve whatever it is that you have the dispute with, so that you can get the payment made, or that they can get the billing fixed, and get the issue resolved as promptly as possible. So, and again, the next part of that section D down here is that the billing agency is to respond to that written dispute to clarify or resolve the concerns, typically within 30 days. So, the whole purpose of this is to make sure that things are getting taken care of in a reasonable period of time, that, things are not sitting out here in limbo for 6 months, a year, multiple years, and ultimately that the things are so old that nobody can remember what the issue was anymore. So with that, this is all driven around getting the paperwork back and forth, so that things can get resolved. Now, if the dispute paperwork, there is a form here that, it basically says a written notification. There's a sample form that is out there. You don't have to use this exact form. It's basically just we do try and provide examples of how you can provide written notifications, just like we have sample letters in chapter 35. But this is one example of how you would, send over, this is the invoice, this is the amount that's in dispute, here's the dates, the hours, here's my description of the issue, so on and so forth. But it needs to be in writing. If those things go back and forth and the two agencies can't agree that which one is right, and you resolve the dispute, then it basically moves to what you would call progressive actions. And the whole principle here becomes kind of the same thing that you would think about in terms of a collections process. But in this case, what you're looking at is a Move down here. This first step is usually either a written and or a phone call between CFO level type positions between the two agencies. So at first it may be program level. Now it becomes CFO level, and they try to work it out. And then if that doesn't resolve the issue, then step B becomes, now it's a director level. And so you note that CFOs most of the time will kind of usually figure it out. They'll come to some form of a resolution because they know what the next step is, and that's getting the directors involved. But the next step is where the directors get involved, and they kind of hash out what are the issues and how do we resolve it to where there's some form of satisfaction for all parties involved, because they know what step 3 is, and step 3 is essentially asking DAS to become the mediator. And I've been in this position essentially on and off from basically 21 years now. I can tell you, I don't know of anybody that has ever gotten to step 3 to ask for DAS mediation, because each step gets, more and more resolution. I don't even know how many times the directors have to get involved, honestly. Just because usually each time you go up the ladder, it is one more escalation that typically results in a resolution. But if you are not following these progressive actions, and it's just, well, I send an invoice, I send an update, send another copy, and that's it, there's no escalation. It's not going to get resolved. And so just reporting it as a liquidated and delinquent accounts receivable, but it's exempt because it's a state agency. Yeah, that's accurate on the LFO, but it's not resolving any issue. And so while there are certainly, I would say, circumstances that may how do I say this? You may understand why an agency may not have the money to pay. I know I've heard of situations like that. That is not necessarily a dispute issue. However, that there are still things that need to be resolved, because that's not the fault of the billing agency. So there still needs to be communication between the agencies as to this occurred, there were goods or services provided, and how does this need to get resolved. So some of that still does come to those progressive actions as to how that's going to come to a resolution. So I just wanted to make sure that we kind of walked through these a little bit. It does require that agencies have policies or procedures to define these progressive actions for your agency. Again, it doesn't say that it includes but are not limited to. So you may have sort of sub steps to this. These are sort of just the high level steps, but you need to kind of make sure that you've defined for your agency, what do you do when you have billed another state agency and they have not paid? How do you go through the steps to resolve that? But on the flip side of that, if you're an agency that receives a bill and you have not timely paid for and or notified them that there is some issue with that billing, then you are at fault as well, because you have not timely paid for and or provide notification of dispute. So kind of coming back to the very beginning of this is a partnership. Both sides need to be good partners in the relationship. So wanted to kind of revisit this particular policy, and hopefully this is something that folks are able to work on in the coming year to do a little bit better at being better partners with each other, to bill and pay timely, promptly, as the word is used in the policy. So with that, I will pause and see if there are any questions regarding OAM 357010. Or did I put everyone to sleep? Oh, come on. I thought I'd at least get somebody to ask a question on this one. Okay. Well, hearing none, does anyone have any topics for roundtable? Is my microphone working? Anthony, do these disagreements occur often? Um, I wouldn't say that they would occur often. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, for FY25, there were only 15 agencies that reported L&D accounts that are from state agency receivables. So it's a smaller subset, but I do know that I have had a few phone calls in the past where, there are some cases where there are circumstances where an agency is in a certain situation that has caused them to not be able to pay certain things on time. And there's usually other fiscal things going on there that have more than one thing happening, is maybe the best way to say that. But, there's usually a few situations where there's other agencies waiting to be paid. So that's a situation there. Sometimes it's a case of seasonal activities. And so sometimes it's things that are just not getting billed timely because of things are so busy at the agency that the program isn't getting things to the finance division to be able to get the billings out. So the data is not being moved in and amongst the agency in a timely manner. So some of this needs to be internal communication within the agency as well. So there can be a number of things that cause delays and issues. And so the later the billing gets out, and then by the time it gets received at the agency to pay, they're like, well, wait a minute, this is from 8 months ago. I forgot, why am I getting this? And so then it causes a lot of research to be done as to, did we even get this? And so it just creates timing issues all the way around. So, Angela, when do I anticipate the training to be available? Unfortunately, it's kind of out of my hands at this point because it's through CHRO that does the upload to the Workday program. They've told me that it'll probably be no later than mid-August. I'm hoping that it will be sooner than that. I'm going to kind of push them a little bit. Hopefully they'll get tired of my nagging and we'll try and get it done sooner than that. But it'll be no later than mid-August. And will it include the ARPM processing? ARPM is part of that year-end training because it is one of the reports that is part of the year-end reporting. Is there anything particular about the ARPM that you're interested in?
No, not particularly. Thank you, Gerald.
Okay. Any other roundtable questions, topics? Okay. Well, our next meeting will be September 15th, which will be right in the middle of the year-end reporting LFO season. So, and actually from a deadline perspective, I believe is like 3 days before the target deadline for submission. So that's probably a really good time for us to meet and hopefully kind of get a check-in with folks on where they're at with everything. But September 15th at 2 p.m. So until then, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your summer. And if you have any questions between now and then, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to answer any of those questions you may have. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you in September.
Thank you, Gerald.
Thank you.